Hi, everybody. This is Steve Cummings and Bob Cariglia from Rizolve Partners. In one of our regularly scheduled podcasts, what we want to do today is talk about pivoting to value. So, as business owners, as you get closer and closer to the point where you want to look at doing something else, or whether you need to consider selling your company, and so on and so forth. As you get closer to that eventuality, Resolve would certainly highly recommend that a mindset change in the owner occurs, and a pivot to value becomes the order of the day. So, what do we mean by that, Bob? Typically, we recommend to to the owners that we work with, looking at pivoting to value 3 to 5 years ahead of an exit, which seems a heck of a long time, and kind of unbelievable, really, if you're a business owner. But what I want to do today is to really consider why that time frame, and some of the key drivers to that. So if we if I think I have 4 or 5 things that I'd like to maybe lay on the table and get your perspective on, really. So we often see, with business owners that think they're ready to go into a liquidity event, we often see that sometimes they're not ready to do that for several reasons. And the first reason might be that there are some deal blockers in place, and we see this time and time again in the lower mid market. Maybe you could chat about some of the deal blockers that we've seen, that investors would be very leery of. But what would be the sorts of deal blockers that we see, and why is it important to clear them away in good time ahead of moving into a transaction?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And one of the key deal blockers that we see very often is around revenue. A buyer is looking, or an investor is looking at, can I trust that the revenue that you're achieving now will be available to me, the new owner, in the future? So one of the deal blockers, or one of the things that we always look to see if there's in place, is, does the company have a robust CRM, or customer relationship management system in place? And if it's not there, if it's on the back of an envelope, or if it's in a Rolodex that the owner or maybe one of the salespeople has, but nobody else has access to that information, then it becomes very difficult for an owner to look forward and really get confidence that they'll have access to that same revenue. And that can be a real deal blocker.
Yeah.
And a CRM, it's not a matter of going out. CRMs are very, very available right now. There's, I'm going to say hundreds, but there's certainly tens and tens of really good quality CRMs out in the marketplace, ranging in all prices, but they all do a pretty good job, and they're all, coming out of the cloud. So they're very easy to implement. But, and this is a big but, and this is a deal blocker, is you don't implement, this week and expect that everyone's going to be on board with it within a few days. A prospective buyer wants to know that the sales organization has been using that CRM, and the information in that CRM, as I said earlier, is robust, it's accurate, it's available into the future. So you really need to populate that CRM over a period of time. They want to see that the sales organization has used it. And if it's not there, that can be a real deal blocker for somebody, because they don't have confidence that the revenue will continue.
Yeah, I said a different way. Obviously, a CRM is a modern day tool that showcases the customer list, showcases the pipelines line of deals that a business carries it out into the for fulfillment out into the future. So a CRM certainly helps a business owner showcase that, and if that information isn't available, then it can certainly hold up the deal while prospective investors do their due diligence on that. The other one for me coming out of the CRM is you can a buyer can readily assess the extent to which that customer size is an issue. So, for example, if we've talked about that in previous podcasts, if there's a major customer that has bought the company's products or services for the longest time, then a CRM is going to showcase that information, and any risk attached to that customer walking away from the company would be in plain sight. So I'm agreeing with you that good customer records and being able to demonstrate the sustainability of future revenue, customer by customer, is going to be important to be able to showcase through due diligence. So yeah, and putting that type of quality of information together, it could take 6 months to put a tool like that to work, but then you really want to see a couple of years of running with that tool so that there's historical analysis that can be brought together through due diligence. And so, just on that timing, you're looking at 3 years to get your revenue funnel properly documented and available to test the due diligence scrutiny.
Well, and Steve, just real quickly, we won't get into it because we could be here all day long talking about just some of the challenges that you have around revenue. But other challenges that you're going to have are things like, is it the owner or is it one particular salesperson who is driving most of that revenue? That can be a deal blocker. Do you have transferability in your contracts with your clients? In other words, are your contracts going to allow a change in ownership so that revenue continues into the future? There's a lot of issues just around revenue alone that could become deal blockers if you don't put the time and effort to making sure that everything is in order before you take your company to market.
Yeah, and as you mention it, are there any disputes with customers, or are there ongoing disputes about the accuracy of the sales invoicing and so on? And certainly, if there's any litigation hangovers with regard to arguments with customers, as you quite rightly say, then that can be a deal blocker too.
Yeah.
So that's good. So all of those, and sometimes litigation takes time to negotiate and agree. And certainly we would highly advise that a fairly clean litigation record is something that you would want going into a transaction, and could well be a deal killer, never mind a deal blocker, if in fact significant litigation was on the slate. So that's a good introduction, Bob. One of the other things that we point to is the range of value, and two similar companies could actually have a valuation that is very, very different. In fact, we can show some data which basically shows the dispersion of values in the range of value for similar-sized companies can be as much as 70%. Low end of the range of value all the way up to the top end of the range of value. But talk to us about the you know, top end of the range of value is approaching best in class. Bottom end of the range of value for a company that is just about saleable, it can be quite different. What are the sorts of things the how can we exemplify range of value to our business owner listeners?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it really comes down to quality of your processes, quality of your documentation, quality of your products, obviously. We know that, someone can be selling, two companies can be selling identical products, but their manufacturing processes may be very different when it comes to the quality and the training of their people and the documentation around their systems and so on and so forth. And that makes a difference to a prospective buyer. They're looking to purchase, as any of us would, you're looking to purchase the highest quality product, and you're willing to pay more for it because you know that will create a sustainable business into the future. But the key here, again, always taking it back, that takes time, and if the company is not ready, if it doesn't have all of those pieces in place, you've got to make sure that you're giving it that time, hence that comment, that you made at the beginning of this podcast, that, think about 3 to 5 years, because it may take that kind of time to build up the quality in a business. And that will drive to, a higher valuation of the company if that quality is inherent there.
Yeah, one of the terms that you often hear, and for some business owners, they quake in their boots about written procedures and so on. But you hear the term, the acronym SOPs, statements of practice, statements of procedure. Um, you know, how important is it to have SOPs over your the systems and processes that you want to be able to showcase to potential
Well, I'll give
buyers?
you an example, and this isn't even just a small company issue. This is prevalent in many very, very large companies, particularly around systems. And very often you'll find that there's one individual or maybe one or two individuals in the organization who understand, the computer systems, that are in place, and they understand how they work and how, the input goes in and what kind of output you're going to get from them and reports and so on and so forth. Now, imagine if one of those people leave the company. That knowledge goes with the individual, and someone who is, you know part of the value of that company is how well those systems are being applied to whatever the company does. And if that knowledge disappears, that's takes value out of the company. So documentation is really important, because you want to be able to have that user manual, for lack of a better word, on how, the best practice is to managing that system, or the best practice to managing the assembly line, or even when it comes to sales, having a sales playbook that is documented, having a plan that is documented, means that, there's been some effort and some understanding put into what makes, the company tick when it comes to revenue generation. So documentation is critical. Another one, of course, is when you're looking at human resources. When a business changes hands, the acquirers are also taking on all of the people within the company. And you want to know, what is the caliber of the people? What is the training? What are their backgrounds? What is their experience? So having documented performance appraisals and having documented HR policies is critical to understanding the caliber of the workforce that you are taking on. And again, that translates, very quickly to what is the value that I'm going to put on that workforce when I'm thinking of acquiring the company. Documentation is critical.
Yeah, and I would just add, if you have a growing company, then you're going to want to scale the business, which means hiring people. If systems and processes are documented, then the ability to train those new people in the systems and processes, and make sure that we have consistent application of the company's policies and procedures and so on. Just makes it so much easier, and that's part of the way that you build culture in the company as well. If everybody thinks the same way, and acts the same way in order to deliver a good quality product or service.
Yeah. Well,
So,
Steve, real quickly, that brings up an interesting comment about culture. And, very often when we think documentation, we think about processes and procedures being documented. But you just brought up a really important aspect, and that is culture is driven by vision. It is driven by the mission statement. And the question is, does the company have a documented vision and mission statement? Because that really sets the tone, for the culture that has been created in the company or should be created in the company. So that it's not always just the hard processes around production or, manufacturing. It's about those softer visions and missions and so on and so forth.
so I just want to bring in the personal element of how business owners think into the business value equation here, Bob. And you and I see it all the time. The personal goals of a business owner can sometimes be misaligned if they have value expectations or they have personal goals that they want to achieve. Sometimes they can be misaligned with what we see in practice with the business. So, for example, if a business owner has a particular valuation of the business in mind, and the actual valuation of the company as laid out by standard valuation practice, in other words, the way the market sees the valuation. Sometimes there can be a value gap. And sometimes that value gap is driven by the personal goals of the business owner. So what I'd like you to talk about is when there's a value gap, what how does that get addressed? How do we address that for the business owners? What are the things that need to be thought about 3 to 5 years ahead in order to reduce those value gaps and bring market expectation into line with the business owner's expectations?
That's a great question. And I think also that is something that is sometimes is not considered, when someone's going through a transaction or a transition. First thing we want to find out is, what is your number as an owner? What do you need to take out of your business? First of all, statistically, with small to medium sized businesses, about 85% of the value or of the wealth of an individual is tied up in their business. Why? Because they put in multiple years of effort into building that business, and that's where a lot of their wealth exists. So when you're doing a transition, when you're selling a company, you want to make sure you're getting the right amount of wealth out of that company to fund, for lack of a better word, what you want to do in the future. So understanding what your number is, do you want to leave money to your family? Do you want to put money to charity? Do you, want to go travel the world and you need to have the funds to be able to do that? Do you want to build a cottage? Whatever it happens to be, you need to understand what your lifestyle is going to look like after you sell the company, so you can make sure and so that, we take the time to help you build towards that value before you put the company up for sale. And that's a critical, aspect. So what are some of the things that we want to do? We want to work with your other advisors, your personal wealth advisors. We want to make sure that you've got a tax plan in place. We want to make sure that we understand, that if you've got some philanthropy goals, that we're addressing those as well. And then we work backwards to say, okay, what kind of wealth do you have in place now, and what do you need to get out of the business? We will then do a value assessment of the company to understand, where are you today, Where do you need to get to? And then we make a realistic assessment as to how long it would take you to get from where you are to where you need to be, so that when the transition goes through, all of the pieces are in place to not only have a smooth transition, but to make sure you come out the other end with the right values so that you can then go on to achieve your goals after you've sold the company.
Well, I think you just introduced an important element at the back end of your presentation there, and that important element is the time function. The To the extent to which a business owner has an expectation about the valuation of his company, which is not represented by the market per se. In other words, if there's a value gap, the ability of the advisors to help close the gap is dependent on a number of things. Number one would be the time available to close the value gap.
Mm-hmm.
Number two would be the risk preference of the business owner. In other words, if there was a fairly large gap in a relatively small time frame, the ability to close that gap would require fairly sizable risks to be taken in
Mm-hmm.
order to close the gap. So time is definitely an important element to solving any valuation gaps, which is another reason why we point to a period of time of planning in order to close value gaps in the range of 3 to 5 years. In actual fact, it could be larger depending on the size of the value gap.
Wow.
But let's not go there. Typically, on average, good planning should take 3 to 5 years ahead, not least of which is to make sure that any tax planning that needs to be done is done in good time and not in contemplation of a future transaction. So Bob, I'll throw it open here. We started off with pivoting to value. We've talked quite a bit about some of the things that need to be done when pivoting to value. But that time frame of 3 to 5 years seems to be a fairly long one. Any other thoughts for our listeners here on that proposition as to why you need 3 to 5 years in a perfect world?
Yeah, I guess I would just my final comment would be, as you say, 3 to 5 years does sound like a long time, but for many of these entrepreneurs and small business owners, they've been building this business for 20, 30 years, whatever it happens to be. You don't want to rush the process at the end to sell yourself short. You want to make sure that you take that time, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, to make sure that all the things that are in place so you can maximize the value of your company. And of course, when we talk about timing, timing's important as well, that the market conditions are right so that you can absolutely maximize the value of your company. Rushing it just because you heard that somebody in the next street or somebody in your somebody that sold their company at multiple values, and now you want to jump on the bandwagon, is not the way to go. Take your time, make sure you put the plan in place, make sure you're bringing together the right group of advisors, because this isn't just one advisor fits all. You need to have exit planners, you need to have your personal wealth planners, you need to have tax plans. You want to bring this group together so that they can work cohesively to put together a plan and a timeline that makes sense for you and allows you to achieve your goals when you ultimately sell the company.
Yeah, good advice, Bob. I would just add, remember, as a business owner, remember that you're passing on the ownership of your company into a different pair of hands. And whilst the historical track record of the company bears some due diligence and is illustrative of what's possible into the future. In a new pair of hands, the future is what the buyer is really looking towards. So they want to see that they're going to be receiving a business that has a sustainable business model, that the predictions of the future have a high probability of being achieved, and that the business performance, the business systems, the people in the company, and so on, the actions that they take in order to deliver the financial results that they've done in the past are repeatable and sustainable for that. So that's really is the future capability of the company that the prospective buyer is looking to do to get assurance on, and that's what's important. So, hey Bob, that's been great. Pivoting to value is a mindset change, as we both know. It is particularly important in the last 3 to 5 years of ownership, and we highly recommend a group of advisors who can help the business owner on his journey to value maximization. So thank you, everybody. My name's Steve Cummings, speaking with Bob Cariglia. We're both partners at Rizolve Partners, and you can find out more information about our company at rizolve.ca. That's rizolve.ca. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, everybody.